all of that like professionalization of the field, do you think there's been a distortion in what philosophy was supposed to be, as you so eloquently say, like to help human beings?
Yeah, 100%. That to me is the opposite of philosophy. That's a nerdy game for people who have too much time on their hands and never got out of the library kind of thing. That's not philosophy.
Welcome everyone to my conversation with Daniele Bolelli. I originally got turned on to Danielle's work by listening to him on Joe Rogan. And since I've become a big fan of his books, his podcasts, he's what you would call a true modern philosopher. Now, for those who don't know him, outside of just his awesome work, his life story is both heartbreaking and super inspiring. After moving to America from Italy, barely a year after giving birth to their baby girl, his wife Elizabeth passed away from a brain tumor. Now, if that wasn't enough, he also lost a job he'd been angling for years. He was on the hook with a new mortgage. And of course, he was now a solo dad and had a daughter to take care of. The way he responded to all of this is nothing short of a triumph of the human spirit. In this interview, he talks about how all of this became a major turning point for him. Before all this happened, he says he used to be super careful and safe. But this made him realize that no matter how safe you play it, bad things can still happen. And so he began diving into things with less hesitation and more courage than ever. And since then, he's launched and hosted 2 amazing podcasts, The Drunken Taoist and History on Fire, and wrote many fantastic books, including On the Warrior's Path, Not Afraid, and 50 Things They Didn't Tell You About Religion. And for those who follow him on social, you can see what an amazing father he is and how grown up and badass his daughter is. In this conversation, we talk about family, death, life lessons from the martial arts, and what it means to be a middle finger philosopher. He's not only wise and extremely knowledgeable, but even more importantly, he's super authentic. One of the most down-to-earth, humble individuals you'll ever meet. This was legitimately one of my all-time favorite conversations, and I hope you enjoy it too. This is Daniele Bolelli.
Mr. Bolelli, welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
100%. I'm so happy to have you here. So, I mean, I've been a fan. I've been reading your books and listening to your podcasts, The Drunken Taoist, History on Fire, for years now. I see you as a kind of like a real life philosopher. So like not one of those stuffy academic philosophers in tweed jackets who hide behind like arguments full of complicated jargon that nobody understands.
Yeah.
But like a real person who grapples thoughtfully with the same questions we all wrestle with, like how to live the good life, how to deal with fear and loss, the role of science, the role of religion, developing an authentic personal spirituality, and more than anything, somebody who's not afraid to talk in simple and practical terms about these questions. Your books, for those who haven't read them, are fantastic. I think you're an amazing writer. They deal with topics as diverse as martial arts philosophy, all the way through to religion, humor, history, but always an engaging, very straightforward language and with tons of humor and wit. Daniele Bolelli, it's truly an honor. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And I think you raised a couple of really important points in what you were describing. One, the importance of communicating in a way that's not for a niche, that's not just for the people who are specialists in a field. But I guess they are the same point. You just articulate it in different ways. But basically, the notion that something like philosophy, if it becomes like its own self-restricted niche where you only talk with other people who are into philosophy and you use the philosophy lingo, and
Right.
it's pointless because the whole idea is that it's supposed to serve life. It's supposed to make our lives better. If it doesn't, what are we doing? And so in that sense, in terms of language, if you cannot talk in a way that a person who has studied for 30 years will understand, but also a kid will understand, also your grandma will understand, also, because then you're moving probably too far away from what makes life real. You know, your language is getting a little too abstract. And when the language becomes too abstract, then probably your thinking about issue becomes also too abstract. So to me, it's like any issue needs to be something that maybe you tweak the vocabulary a little bit, but ultimately you can have the same discussion with anybody. because you're talking about life.
Right.
And you can bring it back down to terms that anybody can relate to, regardless of whether they have studied some stuff or not. That's completely secondary. And so to me, that's a very important thing that you kind of zeroed in on. It's something I feel very strongly about.
Yeah. And do you feel that philosophy's been a little bit, maybe not perverted, but distorted by the professionalization of philosophy into a sort of like a modern career where you need like 1,000 footnotes, like to publish an article? And if the average human being understands it, it's not smart. And complex means intelligent. And all of that, like professionalization of the field. Do you think there's been a distortion in what philosophy was supposed to be, as you so eloquently say, like to help human beings?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that to me is the opposite of philosophy. That's a nerdy game for people who have too much time on their hands and never got out of the library kind of thing. That's not philosophy.
Right.
But there's, I remember
So how did you enter?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I'm just curious, how did you enter the examined life on such a scale? I mean, is putting a lot of thought and self-evaluation into your life a tendency that you always had as a child that was sort of natural to you? Or was there something in your life?
Yeah. I grew up kind of like, my dad wrote a ton of books. My mom was a writer. So, but particularly, so discussing about big issues was something that was always like what we would always do, what would always show up. And the fact that I was a kid, I didn't get treated any different with that regard. Again, my dad may tweak the vocabulary a little bit, because clearly I have less experience and might have not heard some stuff. But other than that, the idea was, hey, these are discussions about life, so I can have them with you the same way as. And in that regard, it's something that he felt very strongly about. Like one of his books actually it's in Italian, but translated, the title is Descartes Can Dance. Descartes as in the philosopher. And the whole thesis was that academic philosophy and that kind of very professional philosophy was basically. And what we need is a more vital philosophy that kind of make your muscles happy as much as your mind, as much as and so that's something that I had it handed to me on a golden platter. Like that kind of mindset was just how I grew up. So it wasn't something that I can claim credit for, that I discovered somehow for myself. It's something that was very much handed to me in a way that I absorbed it, but I didn't have to do much to have it.
No, I mean it's awesome. It's awesome how close to. I mean, so your dad was also a philosopher who was doing it clearly for his career and everything else, but also wanted to popularize and democratize the knowledge and everything. That's amazing.
Yeah. So in fact, it's funny.
That's
because,
awesome. And he taught it.
Yeah, I'm reading. I just started
taught philosophy.
Yeah, I'm doing that stuff. I'm picking up a lot of my father's books and kind of rereading them now as I'm older and taking notes on them. Because I'm like, I want to kind of highlight what were the key themes that showed up throughout all the books. And then I look at some of them and I'm like, while I may express myself differently, I may use different examples, I have a slightly different sensitivity, so many topics. I'm like, oh, I see where I got that one. Oh, and I see where I got that one too. And I see, so there's a ton of stuff where I'm like, oh, okay, that was not exactly my original thought. I get it.
That is so cool. That is so cool to have that continuity with your father that way. That's unbelievable. Is your father still alive?
No, that's why I'm doing it, because he died back in October. So right now I was like, you know what, it would be cool for people who don't read Italian to kind of take some of those ideas, or like his widow was talking about wanting to do a documentary about him. And I was like, okay, well, what do we talk about? Like what are the essential things in his vision of the world that we want to convey? So I was like, okay, let's reread some of the books and let me take notes and jot down some of this stuff. And in the process of doing that, I'm just reading it. I'm like, oh my God, this is like, no wonder I think the way I do. There's so much stuff that I shape. And then, cool. I'm different from him in many ways, but you can still see the stimulus, the origin. You can still see, while I may have departed and made it my own and adapted it to my personality, my experience, and my interests, many of the key themes remain the same.
So I'm really curious because you have a lot to say about Descartes, and Descartes, of course, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Kind of like, as you rightly point out, the separation between the mind and the body,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of stuff that we talk about in terms of the professionalization of philosophy, making it just a mind thing, not integrated into the body, maybe also a separation with nature. And you write a lot about that, about renewing with a more naturalistic thread in philosophy and trying to sort of reintegrate the mind and the body. I'm just curious, is that in your dad's book, Descartes Can Dance? I mean, nobody would associate Descartes and dancing. Was he playing around with similar ideas?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. So when it came to that stuff, it's like I didn't adapt anything. That just straight up from him.
Wow, that is really awesome. That's cool. Moving to something that's really really unique to you in your personal journey and your personal story. In your book, Not Afraid, you write about an experience that most people can't even imagine in their worst nightmare. I mean, it's like we talk about these things, but just reading that story as a father, as a husband, as a person who has bills to pay and so forth. So for people who don't know, in 2011, barely a year after giving birth to your baby daughter, your wife and life partner, Elizabeth, passed away from a brain tumor, leaving you to take care of your daughter alone, which, as a man and as a father, I know how totally useless and terrified we are as caregivers initially. I can only imagine. A couple months later, your teaching hours get slashed. You realize you probably won't get tenure, which is something that you were expecting. And so here you are, single dad, just lost the love of your life, financial prospects diminished. You have to fight with the bank just to keep your home. And as you write, hell was a ninja who entered my house without being seen. But then, remarkably, you write this. So you write, before all of this happened, I used to be very careful. I'd strategize and play it safe. And then I realized that no matter how safe I played it, horrible things could happen anyway. So I began diving into things with less hesitation than ever before. I mean, talk about resilience. I mean, this really floored me when I read this passage. I mean, how did this shift in mindset take shape for you? I mean, people crumble and get paralyzed for a lot less than people lose their minds and feel unsafe over a mean tweet today, right? But somehow you go through this nightmare and you almost shift it into a call to action to dive into life with more energy and zest. I mean, tell us a little bit, how did you make this happen? How did you live through this transition?
I think oddly enough, sometimes major terrible experience are somehow easier to deal, at least on some level, than minor ones. Because minor ones, you still have attachment to the way you want things to be. And they're just this thing that just ruined your day or your week or your month or your year. But that hasn't really shaken your vision of the world or your sense of safety or all those things. You're just mad because this thing is pissing you off. When something is just more earth-shattering, you have nothing to remain attached to. You have nothing to hold on to, or kind of so in some way you're like, okay, I'm still here. I'm not dead, but I have to deal with the fact that all this stuff, just as whatever I thought was very solid, just got blown to pieces. So in an odd kind of way, while it's horrifying and it's terrible and it's hard and it's stressful and all of those things are true, there's an element of it where you also feel really oddly relaxed, because you're like, what else can it's like, and don't get me wrong, it can always get worse, right? So that's always a bad question to ask, what else can happen, because trust me, more can happen. But still, there's that feeling of what's left to be afraid of, what's left to be worried about is all this terrible shit that in my worst nightmare I would have a hard time compiling is all happening at once. Now what? And so and it's a strange thing, because it's now what, it's both real and not real, in the sense that on one level you are liberated and you actually tap into more energy than you think you had, because you're liberated from fear, you're liberated from all those things that you are praying that things don't end up in a certain way, but they just did, so you have nothing left to be stressed about. On the other hand, there is the fact that it's tragic and it is bringing its own level of stress and all of it. So it's weird. It's simultaneously both things at once. On one hand, you're getting wrecked. On the other, you tap into this other energy that can actually help you enjoy small things. Like one thing that freaked people out a lot early on is that I would laugh a lot in those days. Like I would, like even just in the first few days, weeks, months, because at the end of the day, it was like, yeah, terrible shit have happened, do happen, continue to happen, but that doesn't mean I cannot enjoy right now. You know what I mean? That was a funny joke. That made me laugh. I'm gonna enjoy that one. Doesn't really change the bigger picture, but also doesn't mean that every single second of every single day needs to be held. You know?
Hmm. So it's almost like what I'm hearing is like, so there's a forced detachment
Mhm.
from the things that you knew, like your structure, but maybe also a forced detachment from your fears,
Yeah.
because a lot of our fears are theoretical.
Yeah.
And that's what paralyzes us is all the fears that may happen.
Yeah.
And now it's like when the worst happens, you're almost like detached from your fear.
Yes.
And the other thing I'm hearing is when all hell is breaking loose, you just maybe are forced to like hyper focus more on the present and the here and now, and
Yeah.
maybe just appreciate the little things because that's what you need to keep going. And is that accurate, like that
100%.
detachment from
Yeah.
your certainties? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's
Wow.
not, in many ways, like fear is born from hope. It's because you have a hope that certain things turn out that way and you badly want them to turn out that way, that then you're afraid that it may not. But if you are in a place that's fairly hopeless, but it's not, you're not getting tortured by ISIS on a daily basis. It's hopeless on another level where it's like, it's somewhat comfortable on a, well, kind of, not really, but like there's at least some
Mhm.
breathing room there for you, but it's also feel kind of hopeless. Well, then also fear gets out of the window because it's like, what's there to be afraid of? It's like there's nothing
Wow.
you're hoping for. You're not like holding on to a hope, so you also don't have much fear.
And also being needed. I read it in your book, being needed by your daughter and being there for her invested so much meaning and purpose in your life that it was just like a mission that you can sort of hold on to
Yeah.
in the middle of all of this, and just kind of get a lot of directionality and a lot of hope from that.
Yeah. And in fact, it's oddly enough, when things get better, then you remember this stuff and your attachment grows again and you feel, and actually fear comes back through the back
Mm.
door, right? Because it's
Mm.
suddenly now you have something to lose. Now
Mm.
you're like, whereas at the beginning it feels like, well, I mean, sure, it can always get worse, but like after a while you get a discount on tragedies. If you pile up 5 in a row, the fifth one doesn't feel as bad as the
Right.
first.
Right.
When you give it enough time, now there's stuff to lose. It's like a brand new tragedy, and that can mess you
Mm.
up again.
So,
So
so, so I'm curious also what role your relationship with martial arts plays in this, because you've written a lot about martial arts philosophy.
sure.
Your first book, On the Warrior's Path, fantastic book. I believe that you wrote in your early 20s,
Mhm.
which is unbelievable that you would write something so profound and insightful at that age. Looks at different ideas and warrior myths and
Mhm.
extracts insights and sort of taxonomy of different types of warriors and their philosophies. People who don't know fighting culture very well, like a lot of professionals and academics and
Mhm.
people in media, often associate martial arts with like the meathead at the gym, right? And assume that there's nothing really particularly interesting there. It's more like a relic of our barbaric past.
Mhm.
But in your work, you investigate how martial arts is also about the inner journey. May we even say perhaps the spiritual journey
Sure.
of facing your fears and insecurities and
Mhm.
confronting the risks inherent in existence with courage and voluntarily losing your artificial sense of safety and comfort. There's a lot of wisdom, it seems, that is also packed inside of the fighting arts and their philosophy. Tell us a little bit about what martial arts has given to you and how you feel they can contribute to living the good life, especially when you're facing adversity.
Well, I think a lot of martial arts, particularly those martial arts that are a little less just purely aesthetics, where you're just doing kata or something, which don't get me wrong, there's something cool about that too, but is where you're actually sparring, where you're actually, whether it's striking sparring, grappling sparring, a mix of the two, or whatever that may be. I mean, the name of the game is getting your ass kicked because it happens a lot. There's always somebody better than you. For a long time, everybody's better than you. And then eventually you start getting better. But even when you get good, there's always people who are going to be better than you. Hell, the greatest fighter in the world on the next night may get their ass kicked. You know what I mean? So it's like, in some way, you have to come to terms with the fact that you work really hard to get competent, to gain a greater degree of control over the surroundings. But at the end of the day, you never will have a full degree of control. You are always going to end up, there's the potential to end up in a really bad spot, happens all the time. And so in some way, you have to sort of make peace with it, make peace with being in uncomfortable situation physically, being in uncomfortable situation mentally. It's not fun to be kind of physically dominated by somebody else. So to be able to, like, the logical thing would be, okay, I'm out. This sucks. This is not working well. I don't want to do this again. And I definitely don't want to do this with this guy who's better than me. And the odds are high that we're going to end up in the same place again. So to have the fact that you keep stepping up, despite the fact that your odds of quote unquote winning are really thin, that's powerful, because everybody can step up when they think they'll win. But to be able to step up in front of circumstances that seems largely hopeless, well, that takes more guts. That's a tough thing. So I think there's something to be said regarding dealing with failure, dealing with adversity, dealing with being in an uncomfortable situation. I think it's very important, because guess what? Life is going to do that time and time and time again to you. So that's a good way to start dealing with it in a more ritualized space. Now, of course, based on that, it would be easy to assume that, the opposite of the stereotype. Oh, then it's not that they're all a bunch of meatheads. Everybody in martial arts is going to be peaceful and enlightened and sweet. And it's like, yeah, not that either. Because there are a lot of people who learn how to do that well on the mat when it comes to that one activity, but they absolutely cannot bring it outside of the mat to the rest of their lives. Somehow there's just this separation between that activity where they do learn how to do that and they are good at it, and everything else. So, you always hear this thing is like the people who want to push the martial art venue in a more positive direction, they spin it as, no, it's not a meathead activity. It's a tool for self-perfection. It can help shape your character. It can do this and that. And it's like, sometimes it does. Some people are able to do that. Other people just learn to become effective at fighting. That's it, and it's
so that it doesn't translate automatically, is what you're saying. And do you think that if more people, I mean, I don't know, it's an open question. I think if anybody's qualified to answer it, you would be. Do you think that, so a lot of people just fight, they want to learn how to become a much better fighter. For some people, it's a career. For some people, it's a really, really deep hobby, right? They become black belts and so forth. But a lot of them don't really engage with the philosophy. They don't necessarily learn how the lessons they're learning on the mat can translate into their lives. Do you think that if more people studied martial arts philosophy, the ideas of Bruce Lee, the ideas of yourself and many others who write, I know Hickson Gracie just came out with a book as well. Do you think that engagement with the philosophy of martial arts would help that translation of the lessons from the mat to life, which is where it can have a huge impact for you?
It could definitely help. I think it really depends on who's the person trying to do this, who are the people who are trying to stimulate that process. Because in theory, it could go either way, right? It's like you get sometimes the martial art teacher who try to be life teachers, and you're like, you know what? It was a lot better when you just stuck to martial arts, because you're not that good at it. But it's not because the idea is not right. It's good, it's sweet, it's a good concept. It's just that person can pull it off, and how do you say, it sounds so undemocratic to say, well, for you it's better if you don't do it, but for him it's great when he does it. It's like anything else. It's a skill, right? It's a skill to be able to do that in a way that actually leads to positive results.
Is it also about life experience? So you could be an unbelievable martial arts professor, but if you haven't gone through certain experiences, you haven't gone through the experiences, you haven't gone through the learning. So
sure.
Yeah.
And there's a matter of sensitivity. There's a matter of 10,000 factors. That's why in general, teaching somebody to become a better person, it's not that it can be done, but it's hard because it's not a clear-cut 10-step process. There are so many factors at play that it really requires tremendous sensitivity, both on the person trying to help guide you along, on the person on the receiving end, and some luck thrown in the process. It's kind of like raising
Right.
kids too, right? Like some of it is what you do, some of it is who they are at the core, aside from you, and some of it is luck.
Interesting. So you write also a lot about Bruce Lee and his philosophy. And Bruce Lee is the guy who famously broke with Chinese tradition, broke with Confucianism and its rigid laws, and renewed his practice of martial arts with the spirit of the Tao, which you are very inspired by, and which is much more open, inquisitive. It's an innovative philosophy, right? That invites you to tweak and experiment and question everything, including even challenge your masters and teachers, right? Lee often said, no way is the way, right? So no matter what your teacher says, you got to question it, you got to attack it, you have to constantly tweak and innovate. In a sense, that's why a lot of people consider him the godfather of mixed martial arts. In a sense, it's the classic clash between tradition and innovation. So I'm also personally attracted to this philosophy of innovation and rip it all apart and challenge it from all directions and see what survives. But just to play devil's advocate for a bit, do you think that this is a good approach and philosophy once you've reached a basic level of mastery? In other words, is the more traditional rule-oriented approach necessary as a phase in your development for, let's say, the beginner or those who haven't yet reached mastery in a given field? Or should the spirit of the Tao be there from the beginning in your view? How do you see that learning journey unfolding?
I think you do need some structure. Some structure is important. Now, how much, I'm not saying, only after you have been proficient for 10 years, then you can start innovating. Until then, it's structure and nothing but structure. I think it's healthy to start looking around. It's healthy to question. It's healthy to do this and that. But it's also healthy to have develop within some structure, which eventually you're going to transcend. Eventually you're going to move beyond. But there is, it's like Taoism, right? It's yin and yang. You need both to some degree. The exact percentage may vary. Maybe is 80% more innovative, 20 structure, but maybe in another phase of your life is more like 50-50, maybe. So the exact balance is to be figured out. And I think the emphasis on personalizing things should be strongly there. But how much, how early, I think that varies. And I think that's a little more case by case. But yes, the short answer rather is yes, you definitely need some structure at some point, and earlier probably more than later. That does not mean that there shouldn't be any personalization early, but less so.
Right. So as you achieve more mastery, you can maybe start playing with the rules a little bit more, and you've got to be honest about that, right? When you can learn versus when you can innovate.
Yeah, you should probably understand the rules in order to break them. Understand why they are there, understand why they are rules, understand why they don't always work, understand when it's wise to break them.
So it's not an invitation to like open and like you can't just step into a field and start innovating from day one and start doing anything and saying, hey, this is abstract art. This is me expressing myself. It's like, time out, dude. Like there is a reason for all of these rules and these recipes.
Exactly. It's like, I think there's a great line by there's a Bob Dylan line that say, in order to live outside the law, you must be honest, which I thought it was brilliant, right? Because it's kind of like this concept of like, in order to break the rules, you need to have developed a certain internal compass. If you don't have that compass ever, you never develop it, you probably shouldn't start breaking the rules. But if you do, then it's great. Then you can and should be able to move beyond the rules, because the rules are approximation. They are not reality. They are too clumsy. They are too rigid. But they are there for it's kind of like if you learn how to cook, right? You probably want to start with a recipe. It's a good idea to start with a recipe, right?
Oh yeah, for your guests, it's a very good idea for your guests if you start.
Yeah, right. You're gonna not poison your guests. It's gonna prevent you from screwing up too badly. Now, eventually, you're gonna have to personalize it. You realize that there are a couple of things about the recipe that you really don't like, and if you actually change them, sometimes dramatically, it can improve quite a bit the way you enjoy your meal, the way your friends enjoy the meal. So then you you move beyond and you don't even pay attention to the recipe.
You've
But
integrated.
you gotta start somewhere, right?
Right. You've integrated it. You've integrated the learning of it, and
Yeah.
now you can start to transcend it and add your own elements. And it's almost like I'm thinking like Picasso when he decided to go more towards abstract art. I mean,
Yeah.
he was an unbelievable figurative artist. He could do anything he wants, and it's so much more meaningful when you can do anything you want, and then you choose to do this.
Exactly.
That's when you start to play with the art. So that's interesting. You write a lot about religion. Your book, Create Your Own Religion, is really, really great. I mean, it's a very profound book in a lot of ways, and it's clear that you love killing sacred cows when it comes to religion, right? You wrote a funny little book called "The 50 Things You're Not Supposed to Know About Religion," where you expose all the different organized religions' dirty little secrets that are really dirty in some cases. And look, I mean, we know from many organized religions that they exploit the fear of death. They create doctrines like eternal damnation, and no one goes to the Father except through me, and you need to kill all blasphemers or non-believers to control people's minds and so forth. At the same time, you know that there's a big hole in science, right? A lot of people look for science to fill the gap, and you're right. Science is simply too dry to fill the void of the big questions left unanswered. Like, is there meaning in life? What happens after death? Where do we come from? And so forth. And you write this, you say, most secular movements are doomed to failure because they do nothing to lessen the fear of the unknown. So in your opinion, is that what explains the resiliency and popularity of organized religion even until today, when we have access to all this information, and even fundamentalisms? And if science and secularism, if science and secularism can't fill that void, what's our best bet? Like, what are we left with? What should we use as tools to grapple with that void?
I think it's a problem that definitely has to do with religion and science, but also has to do with other factors. When people kind of look back to the past and the values of the past and kind of bemoan the loss of the previous values, when the stuff that you don't like that's more recent is there for a reason. It's because the values of the past suck for a lot of people. They did not work and they felt the need to break away from it. Then what they created is not necessarily that much better than what they departed from. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But typically what you end up is usually two bad answers that both are partially correct, where there's a need for people have a need for spirituality. People have a need for powerful ritual. People have a need for things that make them connect with the unknown. There's nothing wrong with those needs. It becomes a problem when then it becomes attached to a bunch of dogmas that are squash the unbelievers and all that. Vice versa, science is an excellent tool. It's a fantastic tool. It gives us so much. But if you propose it as the one and only tool, there are a lot of things that science can deliver. And so you are stuck with either, yay, we got the scientific method, is a cool thing, but it leaves you completely, doesn't really scratch that itch that is inside most people. Or in order to scratch that itch, you have to go back to kind of the old fascist and the way they did things. And it's like, can we not do either? Can we just figure out what are those things that are delivered? Like, what is that people really crave in organized religion? There's nothing wrong with those needs. Those are human needs. What is that people crave in science? Those are all needs. And if people crave them, there's a good reason. So the question then becomes is how can we satisfy those needs without all the baggage that's often tied to them? Like I was having today a discussion regarding patriotism. It's like, I personally don't get it, because to me, I understand face-to-face community and I understand issues on a human level. The nation to me is too much in between. It's like it's too big to be a face-to-face community and it's too small to be all-inclusive. But again, who cares? If somebody else makes it be something that helps them be a better person, good for you. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying for me it doesn't work. But the question is, there are things that something like patriotism will deliver. So what are those things? And if I think that patriotism may not be the best way to go about it, how can I substitute those? How can I deliver that same satisfaction that people derive from patriotism without what I think are the dark side of that, the patriotism turning into kind of foreigner hating nationalism and all the we versus them mentality and all that stuff. It's like, is there a way to get the good without the bad, basically? Is there a way where we can take the best from, and again, the best maybe get rid of a lot, but there's something there that's real. And usually, even if you split
Is it, Danielle? Are we just uncomfortable with the idea of cherry picking? Like, I have this discussion with my friends all the time. It's like, we look in ancient religious texts, there's so many unbelievable ideas that are unaccounted for by modern science.
Yeah.
And they always tell, and I'm like, these ideas are unbelievable in terms of what they do for human beings. And they're like, yeah, but you're cherry picking because 3 sentences down, they also say you have to kill all non-believers. And I say, hell yeah, I'm a cherry picker. I ruthlessly cherry pick if I see a good idea. Whereas even science, like, and you write a lot about scientism and the new atheists and so forth, they also want us to adopt an all or nothing. No. There's one line that's wrong in the religious text. We got to discard the whole thing and just dive into the scientific mindset, whatever you can prove and touch and feel. But why wouldn't we be comfortable if we're going to be real rational seekers and we want to find the good wherever it is and whatever clothing it has? Why are we so uncomfortable with this idea? Yes, we are cherry picking, 100% cherry pickers.
Because I think it puts the responsibility on you for the outcome. That if you didn't put together all the elements great, the outcome may suck. And then it's not the outcome may suck because somebody else came up with those ideas and you hopped on board. The outcome may suck because you put it together in a way that didn't work.
You suck.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier to hop on a bandwagon that's already existing because it takes the responsibility away from you. It takes hard work away from you because you don't have to figure out, you don't have to read 10,000 things and figure out what's good, what's bad, what's working, what's not. You can kind of buy a prepackaged ideology that tells you what's good and what's bad, and you just follow it. That's easy. That doesn't take that much work, right? So I think that's a lot at the roots why people are uncomfortable with it, because then they feel like, wait, but there is no greater external authority that decide what's good or bad. I'm just making it up as I go. And I'm like, yes, you are. Everybody else is too. Even the greater authority that you're delegating power to has done the exact same thing. So might as well do it for yourself.
Right. It's the derived that it's that need for certainty that we have, and to think like, okay, well, these thinkers or this thought movement is the one I'm going to be a follower of, and just get rid of all these crazy questions and this uncertainty. And you've written a lot about science. So initially, when I started getting familiar with your work, create your own religion. You are very, very vocal and humorous about like poking holes in organized religion. Really ruthlessly and without, but at the same, so typically people who do that are going to be more, 100%. I'm on the science boat. It's just science alone. And you've written about a phenomenon called scientism, which is a form of, in your words, an arrogant secular fundamentalism that seeks to squash any alternative way of looking at things. And that's why I think there's so much nuance in your work, because you also call out the fundamentalism and the excessive certainties on the other side of the equation, and say, no, we've got to be a lot more careful here. We've got to be a lot more case by case. We have to grapple with the complexities and the nuances here. And you look at that through the prism of what the Tao calls the cosmic mystery at the root of existence, right? So you don't pretend to have all the answers. There's an honesty of there's so much mystery out there. And so do you think that people who latch on to the science, like science has all the answers, do you think that they lose touch with that sense of mystery and that humility that's on this quest?
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced so many things that cannot be explained, at least by our current understanding of science, like where we are at today. Maybe I don't think anything is supernatural per se, in the sense that everything is natural. If it happens, it's part of nature. It's just a part of nature we haven't understood. And to me, even if somebody say, like, I have no idea if there are spirits or not floating around, but if there are, they are part of nature, right? That's part of what.
Yeah.
But the question to me is like, there's so much out there that just in my own life, without even going beyond that, that I've seen where it's like the current answers don't explain it all, that I'm like, it's obvious that science is an incredible tool and it delivers a lot of answers and it does help, but it's limited. There's stuff that just because it's not replicable in a lab doesn't mean that it's not real on some level. And sometimes I feel that in order to fight the more superstitious, backward approach that sometimes some organized religion have pushed, science pushed this other super strict line that is like, unless it's replicable in a lab in this way, then it's not real. And I'm like, to me, it's like, I mean, forget even strange things. If you keep it basics, science doesn't explain, well, falling in love. You know what I mean? It may explain why people decide to hook up with one another for sex or to form a unity in a very pragmatic way. But that experience of falling in love is not something that you can reduce to purely some weird chemical reaction. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like, it's desire to sometimes over-explain everything, to me, betray a certain insecurity, because then you reach a point where it's like, admit that you don't know, and that's fine. Admit that, look, from year to year, we can explain it to a T. We have all the elements. Past that point, the evidence start getting thin. So whatever we're going to conclude from there says a lot about us, even more than about the phenomenon we're observing. I don't have a problem with that. And I think that's part of why sometimes it's so much easier to fit in a camp or another, because it's like, oh, you are the organized religion guy in this one religion, then everybody else who's in that thing is behind you. Or you are the science guy who say all spirituality is bullshit anyway, and then you have all this. To me, it's like I'm kind of allergic to belonging to anything there, because I always feel that it's based on somewhat of a dogmatic thinking, because there are always exceptions, but strict membership in that kind of mindset require you to start discounting a lot of the exception to make it a rule that people can gather around. And I have a very hard time with that, because in my experience, while the rules are very useful, there are always, not just there are always exceptions, but there are a ton of exceptions. So over worshiping the rule sometimes start missing the point.
And I think a common theme that you hear with a lot of naturalistic philosophers is the connection with human intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these ideologies tell us not to trust our intuitions, because this is the answer. This is the prism through which you must explain everything. Either it's evolutionary biology, or there's no such thing as free will, because everything is a consequence of physical and chemical laws, or everything is an expression of the will of God, and that's it, and all the answers are contained in this book. And we dissociate with our intuition. And what I'm hearing from you is that to be a true seeker that's in tune with nature, you have to also trust your intuition. When you feel that there might be something there, you can't fully explain it. But you know what? All these prepackaged answers don't necessarily explain it either. And we know already from our history that a lot of our intuitions ended up with a lot of them being validated by science.
Absolutely.
So maybe some of the intuitions that we can't prove today will be validated by science in 300 years. Does that mean that we shouldn't listen to them? Right?
Exactly. It's like, I have a tendency to, I don't believe anything and I don't disbelieve anything. You know, there's the stuff I experience, and then there's everything else. And even the stuff I experience, I may be able to only explain it up to a point. It's like, let's say if I experience something that cannot be currently explained by the laws of physics as we understand them today, does that mean that I'm warranted in then running around going, oh, that means that it was this other? I'm like, I'm making it up. I don't know. I can just tell you that this happened. I can tell you that it's not answered by this particular model. Beyond that, what do I know? You know, I don't know why it happened that way. I'm not sure that it's going to happen that way another time. It's like, I mean, once, I'll give you an example. It's like one time I basically pretty much lost a finger, where it got crushed under a tree in a way that, like, the bone was poking out in two ways and the skin was mostly gone. It was terrible, right? And then it swelled up so big that it couldn't tell anything anymore. And I was so far from any close hospital or anything. And I was in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, you know what, screw it. I'll just deal with it. And that's how it is. And then a few days go by and the swelling started going down. And I touch and I'm like, this kind of feels like it's in one piece. And I'm like, did I just see it? Like somebody else is like, no, your finger was broken in 3 pieces. That was bad. And I'm like, yeah, right. That's what you saw as well. And then it's like weeks go by, finger is completely in one piece, the skin regrow. You can't even tell it ever happened. And now, am I going to try to have my finger crash another 3 to experiment if that's replicable or no? Is like, I'm not going to do that. The odds are not good. However, did I just see something that objectively makes 0 sense? Yeah. What do I do with it? Does that mean, should I start running with theories about God and the spirits and this and that? No, I don't know. I don't know.
So what you're saying is that when you go through an experience that doesn't fit with your pre-existing models of reality, instead of saying, oh, the explanation is in the model, you say, I'm uncertain. So like my models must be provisional. They're not absolute. And so, hey, maybe we need to revise this thing.
Yep. 100%. And it doesn't mean that you should trade one model for the next, because the other one sometimes may be just as made up. So it's kind of like, I think becoming comfortable with the fact that there's way more than we don't know than we do know, and just kind of keeping your knowledge of anything real humble. Because at the end of the day, it's just what works. Like, who cares what the theory is? Who cares about kind of the abstract principle? Is like, does it work today or doesn't it? I don't even care that it worked last week. I mean, I do. It's like, that's nice. That makes me slightly more confident to use that. That's something that never worked before. But at the end of the day, does it work today or not? That's the only thing that counts. Does it make my life better, the life of people around me better or not?
That's great. And that will naturally lead you to consider solutions and answers and explanations from multiple viewpoints. And it's like politically too. Sometimes you hear conservatives make an argument. It's like, wow, that really makes a lot of sense. And then liberals will make another argument. You're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Like, do I need to pick a team? Do I absolutely need to take a team and say the other guys are wrong and the other guys are evil? Like, no, you guys both sound like you're seeing some version of reality and not seeing other stuff.
Yeah, I think it's there's a story that I particularly love. I forget where I heard it, so I kind of forget the details. But the basic principle is somebody goes to this guy, so person A goes to this guy and sets out a thesis. Blah, blah, blah. I forget what the specific example is. Like, so and such thing, this is the truth. And the guy goes like, you're right. Person B goes back and is like, no, that's complete crap. Da, 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 da. This is the truth, and this is why. And they lay out some good evidence. And he's like, you're right. Guy number 3 shows up and he's like, they can both be right. They are arguing mutually opposite things. How can you say that? And he's like, you're right. The point there being most anything. Take any religion, any philosophy, any political position. Take even the most awful ones, okay? Not just the good ones, even terrible stuff. There's usually at least a grain of truth there. Something that on some level makes sense. Something that maybe the answer sucks, but at least he put the finger on a problem that nobody else was answering satisfactorily. Even if it's only that, that's real, that's legit, that should not be discounted. Doesn't mean you should embrace everything that follows from that, but that there's a partial truth that almost every philosophy has. The problem is that they take that partial truth, they turn it, they stretch it way beyond where it's warranted, turning it into an absolute, and it no longer works at all. It's terrible. But that doesn't mean that the little seed wasn't good there. Again, maybe it was just the question, none of the answer. Maybe it was a partial answer. Maybe it's an answer that worked in some cases and not in others. So to me, is rather than making argument in the abstract about this model or the other, good and bad, because the reality is almost every model is going to have at least a percentage of good. Now, the percentage may change. One model may be 80% good and one may be 1% good. So I'm not saying they're on the same playing field. But there's something there. It's like, why throw away the 1%? Maybe that 1% is actually important. So even if it's tiny within the economy of a crappy model, let's take that 1%. And let's figure out how to to me, like it goes back to that kind of combining things in a way that work. Like, what do I care if the answer is a socialist answer or a capitalist answer? You know what answer I like? The one that works. The one that at the end of the day make people happy and everybody has food on the table and life is working out okay.
That's amazing. But that requires a certain comfort level with uncertainty and because you don't pick a team, and so a kind of a radical inclusiveness when it comes to considering answers and solutions from multiple frameworks, even if that creates a little bit of ongoing uncertainty for you. You can't say team blue, you can't see this religion, you can't say this ideology, but that's kind of like a price that you have to pay for that radical inclusivity and including all of the different perspectives that you're considering and all the different traditions. That's amazing.
And this is not a centrist thing where it's like, oh, it's always in the middle. The answer is not. Sometimes you may have one side that's 90% right and one that's 1% right, but the question still is, the 90 is not 100 and the 1 is not 0. So let's figure out still what you can save from various and try it out. And try it as okay, we'll try this model. It takes 80% from this and 20 from that. Oh shit, it still doesn't work. Let's tweak it a little. How about we make it 70-30? Okay, that's working a little better, but we're still not there. How about we? And you're constantly retweaking it until you come up with something that works. And then it works for now. Maybe in the next years, things are going to be a little different, and that 70-30 no longer works, and you have to tweak it again. And maybe it goes to 99-1, or maybe it goes to 50-50. The range is complex, right? It's all over the place. It's not 50-50 at all. It can be very, very radically different, but there's rarely 100-0. I rarely in anything. Whether we're talking about martial arts, religion, politics, I don't find all the good answers belonging to one school of thought or one school of martial arts or one religious idea. I don't. I find some good answer. In some places, I find answers that are, on average, a lot better than others, but they are not all there. So it's like, okay, let's take it from multiple sources.
I love it. You can tell that how much love you have for and passion you have for ideas, that you're willing to do this and constantly consider all the different traditions, and it's amazing to see you work through that, and it's a lifelong quest. It sounds like.
Because it's
my last question for you,
because it's constantly changing, right? So it requires new answers all the time. I mean, even think about like how you raise a kid. You may have your philosophy, but one day you need to tweak it a little, because that day, maybe you have been very hands-off, letting them be this and that, but you realize, okay, now something has changed. They need a little more structure. Okay, so let's tweak it. There's nothing wrong with adding a little more structure. Let's test it. Oh, they're responding well. Oh, guess what? That was the right answer. Okay. But maybe in 6 months, they no longer need that structure. They are past it. And so you don't need to hold on to it forever. Now you can let it go. It served its purpose. That's good.
Right. And if you have the love of learning, it's almost like a natural process, because it's like you're doing stuff at the highest level that you've figured out today. But like, who's to say that in the next 2 months, you might not learn a huge piece of the puzzle that you didn't know?
Yep.
So what, you're not allowed to make changes just because you were ignorant at one point in your development path? You've got to be married to that level of myopia and ignorance for the rest of your life. It's like, if you have a love of learning and knowledge, and I feel the true scientists are like that. They've got this radical humility, and everything is provisional, and everything's always up for revision.
Yep.
And most of them, the true scientists, are really, really radically open at the level of their hypotheses, at the very least, right? Because like you say, like, who knows? Maybe they're spirits flying around, and one day we develop the equipment where we can actually see them, and then we'll just call them natural phenomena at that point, right? Today, they're like the stories that are invented by human beings, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's great. My last question for you is this. So you love the middle finger. You love it. It's everywhere. It's on your book cover for Not Afraid. It's on your website. And I find like there's a lot, it's obviously playful and somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But I find there's a lot in the middle finger. There's personal autonomy. There's a little bit of defiance. There's anti-authoritarianism. There's courage and strength. But I find that many people that I speak to, and many people out there, care a lot about what other people think, or are afraid. They're afraid of the backlash to if they would be fully honest with their opinions or their beliefs. They're afraid they might lose a job. They're afraid they might lose their friends. They're afraid that their image might be affected. My question to you, somebody might also call you a middle finger philosopher, because you're like, no, all of your certainties there. Sorry, it's all provisional. Everybody says they've got the full answers. You don't. Sorry, tough luck. Deal with it. There's a lot of that in your philosophy. How do you know when to bust out the middle finger in integrity, and when you can be more contrite, even if it means sacrificing something you care about for the benefit of someone else, and being more that humble? Where do you cross that? How do you know when the moment comes for this is a moment for no, personal autonomy time?
In 99.9% of cases, the whole middle finger idea is not personal, is not toward a specific person. There are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, is not. For the most part, is either, yes, a rejection of something that's binding you down ideologically, or it's that element of defiance that you mentioned, which is sometimes like life can be brutal, life can be harsh, life can really grind you horrendously. So that middle finger moment of having these, you know what? Yes, and there's nothing I can do about it. And yes, I got my ass kicked horrendously, and I'm still standing here. So middle finger to all the forces that are trying to squash you, because it's like, you don't really have a great argument to make, in the sense that you're not going to stop those forces, you're not going to defeat those forces. It's not that kind of victorious. It's more like, yep, but I'm still here. And so there's a certain pride that comes with that degree of defiant moment of like, you just got smacked down, but you still come up and say, screw you. And it feels, perhaps in a juvenile kind of way, but it feels really good. It feels like, okay, that didn't get taken away from me. That feels good. That makes me, that means the game is not over, kind of thing. So I intend it more that way than like, I tend to be, I'm a big fan of being polite. I'm a big fan of trying to be as gentle as possible with other people, including people who have radically different viewpoints. So I don't have the kind of middle finger in the sense of like, screw you to anybody who doesn't get it. No, it's like, they don't, who cares if they get it or not? If you're as long as you're polite, of course, as long as it's reciprocated. It's kind of like, it's a very respect-based thing. I'm not going to disrespect you because you have different ideas or you do some stuff that I consider dumb or whatever that may be. It's if you don't extend the same respect toward me, well, then all bets are off, screw you. But otherwise,
then it's a different middle finger.
Yeah, then it's personal, right? But until that point, it's not personal. It's, look, you're somebody who's struggling with the fact that being human is damn hard, that it's hard to come to terms with all the forces that make up the universe, to come to terms with all the things that are all our insecurities, all our fears, all our this, all our that. So unless you're doing something absolutely atrocious, who the hell am I to judge you and your choices? I may disagree, I may think they don't work, I may think they are not really helping, but as long as you're not doing something awful, hey, that's fine. That's part of, I'm sure I do plenty of dumb shit myself all the time. So again, there's no point for me to sit back and point the finger saying, you are the bad one. Again, with the exception, if somebody is crossing a line and they are being absolutely awful or they are personally disrespectful, that's a whole different story. But otherwise, it's more of a cosmic level, dealing with the fact that life is tough and having a certain defiance that allow you to get up in the morning.
Right. Defiance and dignity almost, I'm hearing. Like, you know what? Like, all of this stuff may be super oppressive and difficult, but I'm almost hearing like a really strong resonance with one of Viktor Frankl's great lines about no matter what you take away from a human being, you could never take away their power to decide what their attitude is going to be and what your response is going to be given any circumstance, no matter how atrocious or horrible. You always have that power. You always have that strength.
I think that's like 99% correct. And I love that, because that's a beautiful attitude to have, because you don't control external events, but you can always control that. I think there may be a place where if you pile up enough pressure, eventually you break, and there is no figuring out how to respond. So I think that's also true, but I think that applies to a much, much smaller subset of reality than most people will. I mean, the guy went through the Holocaust and still managed to have that attitude. So that's pretty extreme.
Yeah, it's like, what's your excuse?
I'm sure you can.
It's like, what's your excuse? He went through the Holocaust.
Yeah, I'm sure
he went through the Holocaust and he didn't catastrophize.
Yeah, I'm sure you can go through Holocaust time 3, like make a particularly bad Holocaust, even worse than his experience, and maybe he'll break. But, you know, the idea is not that you're never going to break. The idea is to make that less and less likely so that day-to-day events are less likely to get you there, or even tragedies or even bad things, that you can have that space. That, again, it's not a ego, look at me, nothing can break me. It's like, well, let's try. I think maybe if you, but I think it's, so I think it's good to be realistic about it. The fact that, you know, even that up to a point, but I think there is a lot to do in terms of extending that point so that life maybe will not find your breaking point.
But Daniele, I think in a similar way as Franco, I think in your case, your life is a testament to it's a victory of the human spirit. It's super inspiring to see everything you went through and what you created out of it. It's truly inspiring. I think your message is important. I think your way in which you handle nuance is refreshing. I think it's needed today. Not sort of like developing these us versus them, super big, rigid ideologies. Your reconnection with the natural world, which is something that philosophy desperately needs a lot. I think it's just your message is important. I think your message is inspiring. Your life is inspiring. I thank you so much for making yourself available for this interview. I hope people get a ton of value out of it. And any parting words or thoughts or stray thoughts or inspirations that you want to share?
No, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I'm very glad. I think we were flowing from one thing to another. It was a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much.